Well, I'd like to dedicate the panel this morning to the memory of Oriana Fallaci. Last November, the Center was privileged to honor Oriana with the Annie Taylor Award. And this is an award conferred on individuals who show exceptional courage at great odds and in the face of great danger. And Oriana had said that she was delighted to receive an award that was inspired by a woman who jumped over the Niagara Falls in a barrel and survived. She thought it was 1,000 times more precious and prestigious and infinitely more ethical than receiving a Nobel Prize or an Oscar. She also said in her characteristic way that the award overestimated her guts and that it was jumping over Niagara Falls was far more dangerous than writing about the truth. It was her last public appearance. Serge Trivkovic said that Oriana was an outstanding defender of our culture and civilization against the barbarity from without and the betrayal from within. Oriana was a fierce critic of jihadism, an outspoken opponent of Muslim immigration into Europe, and she felt that Europe had already become Eurabia, or a colony of Islam. Oriana was a great admirer of David Horowitz, as she called him, and Daniel Pipes, as well as our first panelist, Robert Spencer.
The most common understanding of Europe in relation to Islam is that there was no trouble at all until the Crusades, at which time the Europeans attacked the Islamic world, unprovoked, uncalled for, imperialistic, proto-colonialist, and this was the beginning of centuries of hostility that continue to this day. Bill Clinton has subscribed to this view, as well as many others. Unfortunately, however, it's not historically accurate to say that the Crusades were the first encounter of the Islamic world with Europe, or Europe with the Islamic world. The first encounter of Europe with the Islamic world came much earlier. As a matter of fact, it came from Muhammad, the prophet of Islam himself, when he wrote to the Eastern Roman Emperor in Constantinople, the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius, and he told him to embrace Islam, and that if he and his dominions, if his subjects embraced Islam, then their lives and their property would be safe. In other words, the implicit threat was that if they did not embrace Islam, then their lives and their property would not be safe. And indeed, they weren't. Muhammad himself, before the end of his life, the last battle that he undertook was not actually specifically a battle at all. It was an attempt at a battle. He rode in the heat of summer in Arabia to the Byzantine holdings in northwestern Arabia, bordering on Syria, and he tried to engage the Byzantine army there, but the Byzantines withdrew. However, at that point he received, or shortly thereafter, the revelation from Allah of the 9th chapter of the Quran, which stands as the Quran's last word, according to mainstream Muslim theologians, on jihad and the relationship of believers to non-believers, and which is the most bellicose and violent of all the chapters of the Quran, stipulating that Muslims must wage war even against Jews and Christians until they either convert to Islam or submit as inferiors under Islamic rule, with all kinds of legal regulations in place designed to ensure that they feel themselves subdued. Muslim warriors took this very seriously from the beginning, and shortly after Muhammad's death in 632, began to chip away at the Byzantine holdings in North Africa and the Middle East, forming what is now, by conquest, now known as the heart of the Islamic world. And fairly soon, very soon, really, they swept into Europe. Only 16 years after Muhammad's death, in the year 648, they originally laid siege to Constantinople itself. That siege failed, as did a second siege of Constantinople in 717. It wasn't until May 29, 1453, Black Tuesday, that Constantinople actually fell to the jihad armies. But that was unfortunately neither the beginning nor the end of the jihadist advance into Europe. Spain, of course, conquered by jihad armies coming up the other way through North Africa, invaded in 711 and conquered by 715, was held until 1492, as most people know. There were then attempts to conquer France, stopped by Charles the Hammer, Charles Martel, at the Battle of Tours in 732. There were subsequent attempts to invade and conquer France in 792 and 848. Both failed. However, the jihad armies did occupy Sicily and southern Italy for quite some time, beginning in the 9th century. Rome was threatened by them in the year 846. And an intriguing historical parallel, the Pope agreed to pay tribute to the jihad armies in return for peace. In the year 1071, in the Battle of Manzikert in the east in Anatolia, Byzantine power was decisively broken and the road was opened, although it took quite some time after that. The road was opened for the jihadist advance into Europe to continue relatively unimpeded. It was interrupted shortly thereafter, however, at the request of the Byzantine emperor, who sent word to the West and to the Pope asking for help. This resulted in the First Crusade. The Crusades were thus not an act of unprovoked aggression. They were a response to centuries of uninterrupted aggression from the Islamic world that had gone relatively unchallenged. The Crusaders certainly did some things that cannot be excused, particularly when they targeted Jews, when unfortunately they would have been much wiser, and it would have changed history in numerous positive ways had they made alliance with them as groups that were both threatened by the jihadist onslaught and fought on that basis. But in any case, the Crusades interrupted the jihad advance into Europe for 200 years, but they did not end it. The conquest of Constantinople took place after that, also followed by further advances into Eastern Europe and ultimately to Vienna. That far into the Central Europe, when on September 11, 1683, the siege of Vienna was broken, and that was the high watermark of the advance of the jihad into Europe until modern times.